There we go. Well, welcome everyone to Mountain Sky Vital Conversations, a time to discuss important topics related to the health and vitality of our congregations and our communities. I'm Jeff Rainwater, Superintendent of Congregational and Community Vitality. My pronouns are he, him, and his. And I'm honored to present our two guest speakers today as we discuss sacred music and worship arts in the age of COVID-19. First, it's a joy to welcome Dr. C. Michael Hawn, who is the University Distinguished Professor Emeritus of Church Music at Perkins School of Theology, Southern Methodist University. He is a gifted teacher, author, and a person who is, as he admits, is looking at worship in the era of COVID-19 most often as a participant and a receiver of that worship, but he also admitted from time to time, including just a week ago, I think, preached a sermon and does some special music around as well. So he is by no means off the scene on this conversation. So welcome, Dr. Hawn. It's good to have you with us.
Thank you.
We also welcome our second guest, who many of you know, Joe Mazza. Joe is the Director of Creative Production at Trinity United Methodist Church in Denver. Joe is a musician and so much more. He currently works with the Denver creative community on events, both inside and outside of the church, that explore the creative gifts God has shared with all of us. Joe, it's good to have you with us. Thanks for sharing.
Thanks, Jeff. It's good to be here.
Well, Michael and Joe, welcome. Welcome to you all who are joining us today. We are glad that you are here. We're going to spend about an hour together, and exactly at 12:30 we're going to wrap up because Joe in particular has a recording in the age of COVID. You know, we don't do worship just on Sunday anymore, and he has a recording session for his church immediately following this Zoom. So we're going to keep to the clock today, even if we're in mid-sentence. Just want to give you a warning. I want to set the stage for our conversation. You know, in many ways, COVID has been a difficult time for all of us and a challenging time. But the need to change worship, and especially music, in this time of pandemic has been one of the greatest griefs faced by our congregations. So as I was thinking about how we begin our conversation, I turned to a lament, and this is from Psalm 137:7. How can we sing a song of the Lord in a foreign land? Kind of feels like a foreign land right now. And that lament of the psalmist feels appropriate in a time when we cannot gather as we used to. And so I want to turn to these two gifted worship leaders and musicians and start with Michael. Michael, as a professor of music and worship, what has been the biggest challenge you've seen, both as one sitting in the formerly sitting in the pews before we went online, and also as a teacher? What's been the biggest challenge and the greatest opportunity for sacred music and worship in this era? And long term, where do you think this era will lead us with regard to sacred music and professional church musicians?
Thank you, Jeff. It's a real pleasure to be here all the way from the East Coast. That's a foreign land to some of you, I'm sure. But I want to start off with maybe the positive side a little bit on this. This opportunity this forum has presented an opportunity for me to do some thinking about this, just to make sure. I consider, as Jeff indicated, I'm more of a consumer right now. Although I have a doctoral program of church musicians, and I am vicariously learning a tremendous amount through them. So I do have that kind of contact, as well as through my own congregation, where I'm just a member. Although I don't think just a member is what I meant to say, but I participate actively. One thing I've noticed among my students is the adrenaline is worn off. They're very creative. And the former students, especially I've kept up with, I cannot believe the things they're doing. And when it comes to techniques, they're in a better place to talk to you about that than I am and what they've learned. But they've combined that with theological and liturgical insight. But there is a factor of that. You can't escape your office anymore because your office is your home. It's very difficult to move and just have a psychological freedom. On the other hand, I was thinking about the things that we've learned, my congregation and others. And one of them, first of all, is congregations are much more resilient than I think we probably gave them credit for. Um, and congregations want to stay connected. Now, I know that you do, I'm sure each of you are doing some of your own activities to reach certain people that may be a little bit more reticent to keep in contact, but I'm amazed at how much they want to stay connected. One of the things that I've really appreciated is I think we're expanding our idea of sacramental vitality and what it means to have God's presence among us, even if we're participating in a scattered way. That's something that probably is going to bear more reflection in the future, along with the idea of what does it really mean to be a church, our ecclesiology. I think this is opening up possibilities for us that maybe be good for us in a long time. I think I've learned that congregations are more forgiving than and more patient about our little foibles and mistakes and things like that than perhaps they would have been. And I'm hoping that that spirit is one that they'll carry over in the future because I think we're going to need it for some time to come. I think, from what I understand, and you may have differences here, that it's amazing that financially congregations have tended to do quite, admirably with all the things that they have. I realize that there are going to be variations from place to place and the kind of constituency in your group, but I'm surprised that that hasn't fallen off more. Although I am aware that long term, for those of us that have been involved in church music, there may be some considerable financial repercussions, as well as for in any congregation and staff. And I'm trying to read my own writing right here. Oh, I think I've understood that pretty uniformly that people are reaching more online than they reached physically on a Sunday by Sunday basis. So I want to kind of celebrate that and lift those things up as something that we should not let fall by the wayside, not just to give us energy to continue, but to think about what does that mean for how we're going to minister in the future, because I don't think we are ever going to go back. And that's where I want to engage the Psalm 137. I would agree it's a strange land. But don't forget that there was a bit of nostalgia that the Israelites had. Where was the land that they didn't want to go back to? Was the land of their captivity. And so do we want to go back in a nostalgic way to exactly where we were? Well, the twin pandemics we're dealing with of the COVID-19 and racial oppression and justice mean we just can't go back and have any validity as a church. People will just not buy into it anymore. It's not business. It's never going to be business as usual, and I don't think that's all bad. So I want to close off with just a little metaphor that helped me. Former seminary professor of mine of blessed memory, Don Husted, had a quote once in class that just really stuck with me. And he said this: the question for the Christian is not, do you have a voice? The question for the Christian is, do you have a song? And now I like to sing. And that's fine. And I realize that we have complications in singing right now. We're going to perhaps talk about that on a very practical basis. But this may be a beautiful time to develop our song, even if we haven't got a voice. And by that I mean, again, what does it mean to be church? What does it mean to be? What is our message that we want to communicate? What what is the what new song should we be learning, both literally and metaphorically, in terms of how to meet the future needs. So uh, I understand and appreciate the need to be back and to feel like it was. My own personal sense is it that is going to be in vain and will only drag us down. Um, when I think there are some really good reasons to certainly build on what we had in the past, but look to the future and try to find use this as an opportunity to find a new song. So I'll stop there because I want to make sure Joe has time and then you have your questions and comments. Thank you. Are you, Jeff? I don't think.
So, Joe, some sense reflecting on what Michael said, and also from your perspective as a worship leader, musician, experienced creator, what have you seen as some of the biggest challenges or the greatest joys in this era? And I'm sure you've already noted sort of a refining of practices in the many weeks that have, as we've tried to do worship now for several months. What's your perspective?
Yeah, well, first, I just want to say that I'm both jealous and intimidated by the books behind Michael, and I think it shows
It's all
that
for show.
in that well thought out, incredibly thoughtful response to where we are. I can claim that I've only been in this office since the beginning of July, so that's why it's empty. But the fact is, I don't have those bookshelves anywhere, so not that size. But I think I appreciate the insights that Michael just shared so much and resonate with them about we're not going back. At least that whole idea that we really thought, we'll press a play button and unpause button and go back to what is normal. I think, and hopefully we're all wrestling at least with that. If not, have we arrived that it's not happening? For me, being in that, like many people here on this call, in those kind of trenches of Sunday is never more than a week away, and learning all these new technologies and things and ways of creating worship experiences that people can enter into. That's obviously, it's felt like for a long time, every week we're learning something new. And especially maybe at the beginning, maybe the learning curve has slowed down a bit. But the greatest challenge has been just, okay, it would be great if we could do whatever, and then having to figure out how to do it. But the one of the greatest joys for me is watching particularly volunteers step up, and folks in our congregation, like Michael said, the resiliency has been incredible. I can share a couple of examples where I was at Broomfield United Methodist, a little bit north of here, until July. And one of the things we did for a couple services was we wanted to get some congregation faces on screen. So I kind of researched what's the easiest way for people to send videos, things like that. And I know some of you have done that. I've seen some of them. And we had congregation members north of 80 years old figuring out how to send us videos to share in joy that they were experiencing. And that, to me, just every time I'd get a ding and there'd be a new video come in my inbox, it was like rejoicing time, because we were all learning this together. And so the challenge created a joy. I think some of the other challenges particularly have been, and I don't know how much everyone has kind of thought through this, but the fact that leading worship, elements of a worship service in a physical space is much different than leading it for a laptop screen or someone's phone or iPad, or maybe some people are watching video worship on their TVs, but it's very different. The way we speak, I know that I've seen and had the experience myself of having to preach to a camera and having to forget that you're, not trying to put on our preacher voices and things like that. And just all these challenges of changing the medium. But also with that, there's been a great joy of realizing that our little video cameras here can go anywhere. And so we can now provide moments of worship that instead of just talking about our favorite tree in the park that we like to sit and pray under, we can actually go there and bring people into those, bring our congregations into those experiences. So it feels like every challenge, like everything in life, it creates another joy. But those have been the things for me, have really been those practical moments of, okay, how do we do this? And now look, someone in a volunteer team or from an unexpected place stepped up and just helped us figure it out.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So hearing you talk about that, it sounds like you both are in some sense saying in some sense, we're broadening the sense of sacred space and sacred people with regard to who's leading worship and where we take worship. I mean, and Joe, I think I saw on Facebook, on your Facebook, that you've even thought about trying to take live music, maybe not sacred music, but just the joy of music out into different ways. Like on the back of a truck or on the back of a train. I can't even remember now, but something like that, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I personally feel all music is a gift and a sacred gift. Depends on how we're receiving it and using it. But yeah, I do play in different contexts other than church with music. And so I've been part of, and so is my son, who's a 16-year-old musician, part of front porch concerts where we will sometimes organize, sometimes not, just set up a couple musicians distance apart on a front porch. Yeah, what you're referencing to is there's been a move around here, been a lot of groups that have been renting flatbed trailers and singing or playing and then stopping at one place and then driving to another and singing and playing. And I look at those experiences and I see how the music, the outside of church music community is working really hard to make some of those things work. And I think, well, there's some guidance for us as well. And so, yes, I think taking our music, worship times outside, and many people I bet on this call have done parking lot worship or other outdoor worship is something that, we've been saying for years. The church is not the building, and God just said, prove it. So, yeah.
I'm reminded of, Richard Avery, who just passed away in March of this year. He wrote, "I am the church, you are the church, we are the church together." That is a simple song, but it's not a simplistic song. I would advise you to go and look at that closely again, because written back in the 70s, it was amazingly prophetic. It is fascinating. He was a Presbyterian, but the Presbyterians don't sing it. For some reason, the Methodists really picked it up, but I'm glad we did. But it might be an interesting theme song. A couple of things you mentioned, Jeff and Joe, is the space. I think that what I'm sensing is where I thought we would be on space in about 10 years, we are now immediately moving there. And that was beyond our walls. The program that I'm directing with church musicians has one of its major themes is, and the question I pose to them is, what would your ministry look like in arts and music if 50% of it took place outside the building? This is starting to kind of, this is the total revamping of how I was trained and basically how I taught for many years. But I would like the vocation to survive and be, efficacious in the future and continue. So actually, I find young people are energized by this. And the other thing that you mentioned is involvement. If I can be a little bit direct here about our United Methodist connections, it depends on the congregation, but I find the larger ones that I'm in, the bigger they are, the less likely that some layperson will have access to the chancel area, other than the singers and the choir. And this has been a great equalizer. Everyone looks the same on this little screen. uh, and it's not that I'm against pastors and bishops and DSs. That's not the issue here. But when it comes to our worship, maybe we've learned something here. Or we're starting to learn something. I'd like to see it extend to children and young people on a regular basis. People who, especially young people who have the technology, this may be a way to engage them. Um, and I like your idea of the little videos that you've been receiving, Joe. That really is exciting. So when it comes to things like hymn singing, I've noticed some of my former students are passing stanzas around to different family units, and then they're singing those, and then in succession somehow they get the key, and it doesn't make much difference if they're a half step here or a half step there, but it's a wonderful feature. And then we get this little glimpse into people's homes and people's lives. It just adds some kind of personal touch. Now, I want to be quick to say that I really like our sanctuary in my church, and I miss it desperately. So this is a both-and world, but I would hope that this kind of equal platform that the virtual world creates. Jeff's box is no bigger than any of the rest of your boxes on this, even though he's facilitating. I think there's something there we need to be very conscious about, and I'll stop for a minute here.
Thank you. That was, yeah, I think that's fairly interesting. I want us to move into and try to sort of answer the psalmist's question. How can we sing a song of the Lord in this foreign land, in this new land? And I want us to sort of think about two foreign lands in a way, if we could. There's the online land that we're participating in right now, fully online. And then there's this, at least for a time, this restricted space land, where maybe we do things in small groups, maybe we do things in our church buildings or not, but we have restrictions in those places if we're gathering, distance, masks. We've been told that singing is dangerous in this setting. And so I'm going to invite, I have a couple questions that I want our speakers to address, but if you have questions, I invite you to type them in the chat. We're going to have some open Q&A at the end. But if you have some questions in that sort of sense that you really want touched upon today, please enter them in the chat and we'll try to get to them either in this next section or at the end in our open Q&A. So maybe Joe, starting with you, but also Michael, what are some most important considerations for offering online sacred music, sort of, and some best practices that you've found so far?
And it's such a broad question. Some of the things that I've discovered is, and we've kind of touched on these conversations. One, we happen to have someone in the congregation at Broomfield who continually reminded us of using the medium. I mean, these are art forms we're talking about. And so anytime there's art, there's a medium. And the big practice for me has been realizing that what feels like a wonderful experience in a sanctuary, no matter how large or small, doesn't always connect through video. But also the idea that with video, we have been, and we kind of touched on it, I think, in the very beginning. It's not just that our congregations are forgiving about our mistakes and all, but video, I mean, really it was YouTube and the access to video publishing by anybody that we are much more used to lower technical standards as long as the video we're watching and listening to is compelling to us. So that means that someone putting their phone in front of them and playing a song on a guitar or a piano, singing is going to be compelling. And so I think that's a good reminder, especially as we consider that, yes, our videos, if we're doing video worship, they're available pretty much to anyone in the world, but we're still, in many ways focusing on our church family. So those are some of the things. I mean, as far as best practices, there's a lot. We did touch a little bit. You kind of, I think, mentioned it earlier, Jeff, about copyright. There are things like that to look into. Fortunately, with YouTube and Facebook, they oftentimes, you've probably seen, if you post a video on YouTube and it has copyrighted content, sometimes they will shut it down, but often they will say, we've got to place ads on this because they have created licensing deals, which, if you can deal with the ads, actually helps you not have to pay for your own copyright license. So those are a few things with online that we've learned.
Maybe we could go ahead and hit a hot topic about masks. Not that we're going to be the ultimate authority, but I found in life that sometimes you just got to go at the big stuff first, because it's obviously created so much difficulty, from political divisions to whatever. I'm not going to give the final word on it, but here's some thinking that I have. Tonight, on Wednesday nights, we have maybe a small group of about 30 or 40 that have been coming out to a seminary campus, which is close to our church. We're downtown, don't have an outside space, so we go to the seminary campus, and we bring lawn chairs and we sit outside, and we distance. We have masks on. But the leaders, who are well separated from all of us, when someone's leading, they tend not to wear the mask so we can hear them. We have no sound system or whatever. I don't think that's a major problem in those kind of situations. I think the problem for masks has to do with the confined space itself, and in the church. And until we know more, I think it's best to be cautious. On the other hand, I don't think it means we're powerless to participate. I'm not leading music and congregational singing right now, but I would be encouraging people with their mask on to hum along if someone's singing a hymn, so they can experience that. One of my former students has done some creative work by passing out some drums and instruments to play along and keep the beat, just to get a sense of participation along those lines. So that kind of goes back to our idea of space. One of the issues that's fallen a little bit by the wayside right now is our whole issue on ecology. And I think I'm finding we can bring this onto the video screen a little bit differently than I could in my church. We don't have any screens in my church. But this Sunday, I was asked to sing a solo, and so I chose to pre-record Great Is Thy Faithfulness. And then luckily we have the technical skill, and we've placed a whole lot of pictures. I'm in Richmond, Virginia. We placed a whole lot of pictures of, some of them just scenes of Richmond, but then we're kind of moving into the pandemic aspect and how it's affected Virginia. And of course, if you know about our monuments right now, it's right in my backyard. I live on Monument Avenue. And then at the very end, we bring in some scenes of the church and some of our gatherings. And, this is a 175-year-old congregation. So what does it mean for God to be faithful through all these experiences? Well, I would much rather have them watch all those scenes than to watch me. I'm glad to sing, but I don't mind singing without being seen. And I think that wouldn't have occurred to me had we been in the sanctuary in regular times. So I'm kind of excited, as long as I don't have the incessance of every 7 days like you all in real world do, and being responsible. So I appreciate that very much, but I am interested in that kind of creativity that can come through it, and the increased use of visual images. I'll stop again because I know we have other questions.
No, that was great, both of you. Thank you. To sort of reflect that, we had a couple good comments in the chat. Jeremy McLeod, who's another one of our musicians in our churches and musical directors, said if you bow it, pluck it, strum it, bang on it, or ring it, it seems to be safe to gather in socially
Amen.
distanced groups, right? So, drum circles is, in fact, I heard one church who thought they discovered drum circle and thought that was a great way to stick it to the conference by doing music without, because that wasn't mentioned in the guidelines. So by all means, do a drum circle. One question, can the worship leaders sing in-house to lead? We're getting ready to go back in church. Must a mask be worn by a singer with wind instruments? What restrictions? So Joe, and you posted, Joe, a study, sort of the latest study on aerosols and singers. And, I think it's good to name. JR also raised that, he's heard that we should wear masks outside, that this is ongoing, and we're constantly learning something new, either about the virus and its spread or about how we can do around it. To Connie's question, Joe, how do you think we can do, like, worship leaders singing, either a best practice for that or to answer a question directly?
It's absolutely difficult to answer. And I think, we are all sharing latest information and things like that. I think it's one thing that I feel like, and I is pretty clear, is that outdoors is safer than in. But indoors has so many variables about the way air flows and all that. That study that I linked there, it's called the International Coalition of Performing Arts, and it was commissioned, and appears to be, by maybe a high school group and some others, and UC Boulder as well. And it's definitely getting some specifics around, they're not testing with live virus, obviously, but just around the concept of aerosol. So I feel like there are, when you're in a space, in indoor space, definitely that 25-foot range in front of a singer is hugely important. I don't feel comfortable with more than a few singers together, even if they're distant side to side. But it's a hard question to answer. It's a really hard question to answer that I think at some point we all have to come up with our own sense of, this is what we feel now, but also then abide by and listen to guidance from the conference as well.
I would agree. I think even outside, and so the only exception has been, and we are very far apart as far as from even the leaders. So I would say at least 15 feet or more. And so the leader, just to be heard, is the only one who drops the mask just to talk to us, but then everyone else is masked. One thing I think we may learn to do better, and it's alluded to in the chat, which is a very good idea, is we want to see a leader's face. And so maybe outside, or even inside, if they're more gathered, there's a face mask that's used more. That's going to take some adjustment in terms of our aesthetics. But I think that, I certainly have a great appreciation for aesthetics. I think ethics is a bigger issue at this point. What is an ethical response in terms of safety and modeling and things of that nature? I see a question about licensing things. That's good for you.
and really quickly, about the face shields, something that is a reminder on, and it's in that little study, is that face shields are very helpful for droplets. They aren't as helpful for aerosol. So in as much as we see science coming out that the virus is aerosolized, they're part of but you're right, to be able to see faces is obviously so wonderful, but it's just something to consider.
So I'm not a musician, but thinking about this from a church perspective, one thing I think that's helpful as we're doing this, friends, is we do have the opportunity, one, to experience others' worship much more rapidly now. And what do I mean by that? Jessica Rooks on a call recently said, I watched 6 worship services today. Mm-hmm. That's 6 opportunities to see a good idea. Use that. I mean, if we are distanced, the one thing that is broken down is boundaries between congregations. There are no more parish boundaries in this age of online. So how do you learn from each other? Watch a lot of services and get ideas. And then second, how do we work together, right? Yes, we are on a 7-day clock, but that doesn't mean now that sermons are recorded, now that music is recorded, now that all these pieces are recorded in a digital medium, that we can't share those pieces one with another if we agree to consensually, right? If we say, as my circuit, I'm going to get together, and we're going to work on a sermon series or a worship series and music. And, Joe's church is going to have it one day and Michael's church is going to have the music the next Sunday, and share so that we have time to be creative in these creative ways.
One of my students has plugged into a situation. There's several churches in Houston, and that I have former students with, and they've gathered virtually and through Zoom, and then their topic once a week is to bring a video or example from a service, and then through screen share, they each view it and comment on it and what it would take to do. Much like pastors would gather around the lectionary scripture or something of that nature. And I don't think that would need to be limited to just musicians doing something like that. As a matter of fact, I think it could be better if it were duo team members commenting on those kind of things, whether the musicians paid or not, just to get the juices going and to try some things out. But I think we're not lone rangers. If I lived in Texas 25 years, forgive me if I use that metaphor. We're not lone rangers in this, and we never were, but now it's even more imperative because I think the tendency is to feel more isolated. So reach out that way with people either nearby, or you can reach out across the country now. It's works just as well.
Thank you. So, Joe, there's several questions coming up about licensing, and you did post some resources, but briefly, what can you tell us about sort of best practices around licensing, live streaming, and what we're seeing, or where can you point us to, especially for any that can't see the chat?
Yeah, for sure. And it's an incredibly complicated topic. I did live in Nashville for a while, and my wife and I are songwriters and have some published songs. And at the time when we were trying to learn about publishing and licensing and copyright law, one of my friends who is a copyright attorney said, like most things in this country, you never really know what the answer is until the judge renders the verdict. So there's a lot of confusing stuff out there. Where I posted there's three main kind of clearinghouses for copyright licensing. CCLI is probably the one most of us know, and many churches will already have a CCLI license for in-person, which covers printing lyrics either on a screen or in a bulletin or something. They also have a live streaming component, which, as I understand, Carrie posted a question about, does it cover video? As I understand, it does, as in not live video, but videos that we're just posting. The other two that are helpful is one called onelicense.net and then christiancopyrightsolutions.com. And that last one actually has a lot of frequently asked questions about this. I personally, again, as someone who is a songwriter who does have some published music, I understand, especially for Christian songwriters who, what they do is they write for the church, and that is their gift. And it's just as we all like to be paid for our gifts and our ministries, those of us who are in paid vocational ministry, they should be as well. There is a lot. So when you hear stories of people, going after churches, I see some of it. I understand some of it. I think that it's also worth it to realize, like I mentioned, that if you post something on YouTube, they are going to, at worst, take it down and give you a copyright strike. 3 strikes, you'll lose your account. Same with Vimeo. And so they are often going to, they have these licensing deals in place. So the publishers are getting paid. Facebook does a similar thing. You'll post, we posted videos on Facebook, you get a note back. Your video has been muted in some of these countries. So it's something we do have to be educated on, and those 3 sites can help.
Connie, I see you have your hand up.
I have a hand up, yes.
Yes, go ahead.
Okay, so in the chat, it was changing my question. So we have a lot of choir music, all of us in our libraries, and I experienced that I wanted to do a piece from within our library, and the CCLI license wasn't able to accept it, which really surprised me. But on the licensing, on the piece of music, it said it was in relationship to copying. My question is, if we own music within our choir library, can we start to do like a virtual group and still put it on live stream? And I don't know how to find out the answer to that question.
Maybe I can jump in just a little bit on that, because a CCLI basically deals with projection of text for congregations. It doesn't really deal with that. Now, you bought the music, you're legal, so the question is not your group singing the music. The question is how it's transmitted beyond.
Correct.
And that's what Joe is speaking to. So and used to, you know, when you were just had even on a local radio show or even local TV, they covered all that stuff. But now everyone's become their own production outfit,
Right.
and their own transmission. And so the answers aren't all taken care of. So you're legal as far as the music and people singing it. It's going back to who's going to transmit it over Facebook, over YouTube, or whatever. And there's where the rub is. Now, make sure you got several things. The text may be copyrighted. The arrangement may be copyrighted. The melody may be copyrighted. So you could have at least 3 copyrights even carried by different publishers. That's where the complexity runs into it with those kinds of issues. I'm sorry about that, but it could also be that only the arrangement is copyrighted. It's a public domain tune. It's a public domain text. So those are kind of the complexities. In a lot of what you're going to be doing, my guess is it's just the arrangements copyrighted. Not always, but a lot of it would be. And so it's a transmission issue that you have to figure out. So in that sense, it's maybe not so complex as you think. But CCLI, as far as text, and that's for congregational use and that kind of. Joe, am I?
Yeah. No, you're exactly right. CCLI does have a video add-on license, but most of us know it as an in-person. One of the things that one of our music staff in Broomfield did when all this hit is she started calling up the reaching out to the individual publishers, and she found a few that had said, we are giving free license right now, and sent her a document. Now, last I talked to her, those were running out around either June or July, but they may have extended those, or they've given options. They mentioned for you, Connie, that the license that seemed to cover some of their anthems at least was the one from onelicense.net, not CCLI. But again, yeah, unfortunately, if a publisher hasn't made a deal, the only option we have is to reach out to the publisher and make an individual deal, which is going to be
generally speaking. If you're using a lot of contemporary Christian music, it's going to be CCLI. If you're using what you might call more contemporary classical music, if I can put it in that regard, especially if you use Taizé or Iona or Catholic sources, which is surprising how many Catholic sources we have in our hymnal, then you're going to run more into the onelicense.net.
Other questions from the group, either in the chat or Jeremy? See your hand?
I'll just give voice to what I was putting in the chat. With one license anyway, there was the need to do this weekly report of what music you used in the service, and they, it was that kind of adding an accounting level to the use of music that was a pain. When you get a video license, what kind of reporting is necessary, or I don't understand how they work.
Sounds like one for you, Joe.
I know, for instance, with CCLI, they pick a quarter out of every couple of years and say, okay, you don't have to report everything. They do it kind of in aggregate. So like with their regular, in-house license, they say, okay, this is your quarter to report. And like you said, you have to report everything, every copy, how many copies you made. And I imagine we haven't run into reporting yet with that, but keeping track of that, because those license companies will probably ask for it. I don't really know the answer. It's probably worth just reaching out or looking in their frequently asked questions of the license you own.
So there's a really good,
yeah.
Go ahead.
You go ahead.
All right. There's a really good quote that came up, or a question that speaks to one I wanted to get to anyway, and that is sort of small congregations, low-tech solutions, right? And I just want to read this as a whole so that everyone can hear it. It's from First UMC Powell. My curiosity is, how will small congregations compete with the digital competition of the CORs, the Church of the Resurrection, in a place where congregants can choose across boundaries, as we discussed yesterday in the Zoom meeting? How can churches that have no director of music or tech team be relevant in a digital space when all the congregation has to do is click a different URL to get original music and such? Can anywhere church music be used in digital spaces, or is there copyright issues with those songs too? I can speak to the last one, but Joe and Michael, if you want to respond to how do you see small churches with, and I think we've spoken to some of this with regard to the democratization of music, and the idea that anyone can create a little video and that there's response to that. But how do you respond to small congregations' needs in this strange foreign land?
One of the issues that jumps to my mind is whether you're rural or you're urban. And what I'm understanding from friends is that rural folk have some additional problems in terms of the cost of accessing, if you're on cable versus on other systems. And so that's a real concern. And it points out, not just for our congregations, but for socioeconomically, the digital divide in our country that is imperative to deal with. Now, internet access is like electricity, and it's like water. And so we're looking at this with school systems. So I think it becomes a technical issue, but also a justice issue in how this is addressed, and the church as a whole may do that. But in terms of I think the patience of congregations to grow together, this is where, once again, if there's some younger people that have a little more flexibility with the medium and stuff, we may be able to call them into service a little bit more and actually lift up their gifts. As long as you don't overwork them. But I think my students right now that I'm working with run everything from having an anthem with 60 windows with 5-part brass and little boxes to setting up a computer in front of the chancel, putting on Facebook, record, and stream. and they basically do their service socially distanced in the chancel area with the major actors there, if I can use that term. And I think people find all of those efficacious in terms of the people and how they speak. One thing I think it is helpful when you have a little bit of technology is to be able to zoom in and see people's faces more closely in a larger sanctuary, as opposed to always having the panorama view, things of that nature. But Joe, you probably have something else to.
Yeah, That's I appreciate that question. And in some ways it's no different than how we put compete in quotes, but we understand what we mean. When a new church plant, moves in down the street, that because they're brand new, they have a new building, and, there's a newness and excitingness. And I think a lot of the answer that we all have is we are faithful to shepherd who God has given us, and to look around our area to help identify that. We know we have had some boundaries erased in great ways, because people who would possibly never walk through our doors will be willing to click on a link to watch a video in the privacy of their own home, because they're not going to have to be asked, well, hey, welcome visitor, or, who are you? And so I think the other area of that is that at some point, and we all do it, we've all probably hopped on to other churches, some of the really large ones. And I know that I've had some powerful moments watching that, but I've also at times felt like I am a spectator and not a participant, because I don't know the people who are preaching. I don't know the other people who are leading worship. And so I will then fall back to wondering what my former colleagues in the Florida conference are doing. And so with there, I find I know people. So again, the best way we, again, quote, compete is by being a presence in our own neighborhoods and our own cities, where people are going to say, you know what, sure, I can go watch a really highly produced online or participate in a highly produced worship service, but I'd rather be with FUMC Powell, Wyoming.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I think about this, and I've heard this in a variety of ways. And in fact, one of our previous speakers had mentioned this in another context, that COVID has only exacerbated, amplified issues that were already present, right? Small churches already were competing with larger churches. They were just down the road instead of anywhere, right? And older churches competing, we don't like talk competition, but there is that sense. And I guess the word of hope that I would offer to small congregations in this time is, and it comes from church size theory, which is those that want to be a part of a small congregation aren't looking for professional anyway. Small congregations thrive on intimacy and on personal relationship. Mm-hmm. So ask yourselves, how do we create that intimacy and personal relationship? And I'm going to give an example, and I'm going to ask anybody from Grace Church Cheyenne on this call to forgive me, because I'm going to say it directly. Their worship service for a while was wonderful and wonderfully imperfect at the same time. And anybody who wanted to be a part of a mid-sized to a larger church would probably not find what they were doing all that palatable, because they were looking for something else. But boy, did it hit intimacy. Boy, did it hit relationship, right? And they were doing it on Zoom, and everybody was participating, and even everyone was interrupting my wife's sermon as she was trying to preach. And it was this crazy, chaotic time in some ways for people that, like me, that are used to a little larger church. But it was hitting the right notes for their church. And yeah, with the COR never do that. They never want to do that. They shouldn't do that because they're hitting a different note. But for the small churches, you can do this without a lot of technology, and maybe you don't do it with technology at all, right? Maybe you have an old-fashioned hymn sing with some hay bales on the back of the truck, right? And you have just a couple people singing, and you step out on the porch and you sing with them 30 feet away. But you've connected because you've made a relationship, and you've looked them in the eye and you've said, how are you? good morning. Work on what you're good at. Work on what you're good at is what I would say.
Jeff, that's a great comment, and we had it kind of in our pre-conversation, and I know our time's running short, but these experiences, we're all craving personal connection experiences, and these shared experiences of singing together. Any way I think that we can offer them to our communities, what you just said is a beautiful way. I think that we're going to find that people who maybe even, they don't care if even though it's church music, they still just want to hear music, and will appreciate the connection. So thank you for sharing that.
Amen.
Well, thank you, Michael. Thank you, Joe, for this time and for your insights into this part of worshiping God we all love, which is the beautiful, the artistic, the musical. And we miss it the way it was, but we know that we're not done with singing a song to the Lord, even though we're in a foreign land. And so I want to thank you both for being here. I want to thank you all for being here. I want to let you know about what's coming up. On August 5th will be our next Vital Conversation, and we're going to be welcoming the Reverend Dr. Leanne Hadley to talk about children's ministry in the time of COVID-19. Some of us right now are struggling with, how to minister to our children and how to be there for our children in a time of when they can't go to school or when they can go to school, but it's going to feel just as strange as us going to church without music. How do we minister to our children? How do we minister to our children's families? Dr. Leanne Hadley is an ordained elder. She's a member of our conference, or I think she still is. She's certainly one of the family if she's not a formal member, even though she now lives on the East Coast, toward the east as well. But we look forward to that conversation with her in just a couple weeks. And so we hope that you will join us for that. And so I send you with this blessing, one and all. Go from this place as disciples of Christ to sing in your hearts, if not with your voices, the song that God has placed upon you this day. And as you go, may God go before you to show you the way. May God be above you to protect you, beneath you to hold you up, beside you to be your friend, and inside of you to give you peace. God bless.
Amen.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Joe. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you all.
Thank you all. God bless.
Thank you.